I thought I had found a simple part-time job, walking a dog, but instead I found myself in a story that turned my life upside down. Something dangerous arose between me, a student, and a man who hid his loneliness behind the walls of a large house. Love that society refused to accept. And most painful of all, betrayal that was impossible to ignore. I never thought answering a dog-walking ad would throw me into the middle of someone else's broken life. At 19, all I wanted was extra cash, something simple to keep the lights on in my dorm, and maybe buy more than instant noodles. But when I showed up at that quiet house off campus, the dog wasn't the only one who needed me. The man who opened the door introduced himself as Michael. He looked composed, maybe too composed, like someone who spent every day holding himself together. Before I could even say hello, his golden retriever barreled toward me, wagging, barking, begging for attention. I bent down to steady him, laughing at how badly he wanted company. "That's Henry," Michael said. His voice was calm but distant. "He doesn't just need walks. He needs someone to be here." It sounded like an odd request, but I agreed. Sitting with a dog for an hour was easier than shelving books at the library. The pay was better too. What I didn't realize was that Michael wasn't really hiring me for Henry. He was hiring me to fill the silence he couldn't stand anymore. The first days felt simple enough. I'd stop by, toss a ball with Henry, walk him around the block. But Michael kept joining us, not in the way an owner checks up on a new sitter, more like someone desperate to keep a stranger from leaving too quickly. He'd stroll beside me, asking questions about college, about my family back in Ohio, about what I wanted to do with my life. His curiosity wasn't nosy. It was heavy with intent, like he was storing every detail away. I tried to keep it light. I was just a broke student, and he was a man nearly twice my age with a life I couldn't imagine. But silence didn't scare me the way it scared him, and sometimes I'd catch the way he looked at me when I laughed at Henry's antics. It wasn't fatherly, it wasn't casual, it was searching. One rainy afternoon, Michael invited me to sit for coffee after the walk. I almost said no, but the storm was pounding against the windows, and it felt awkward to leave. He made the coffee with a kind of care that surprised me, measuring, pouring, setting the cup in front of me like it mattered. "You take it with cream and 2 sugars, right?" he said. I blinked. He'd remembered from a single offhand comment days before. That detail hit harder than it should have. Most professors couldn't even get my name right. We sat across from each other while Henry curled up at our feet. Michael stared into his cup before speaking again. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life? Like you woke up and realized none of it belongs to you?" I hesitated, unsure how to answer. Finally, I admitted, "Sometimes, I think a lot of people do." The way he nodded told me this wasn't a casual musing. His words carried years of exhaustion. That was the first time I saw how lonely he really was. After that, the boundaries kept shifting. Our walks grew slower. Our talks stretched longer. I found myself looking forward to afternoons at his house, not because of the money or even Henry, but because Michael listened like no one else did. He asked about my writing, about the unfinished stories I never dared to show anyone. When I joked about being broke, he laughed, really laughed, like it cracked something open in him. But it wasn't just the conversations. It was the small gestures, the way he brushed a stray thread off my sleeve, the way his hand lingered a second too long when we both reached for Henry's leash. None of it crossed the line, but all of it lived in the space between what was said and what wasn't. I told myself I was imagining things. He was married. He wore a ring I tried not to notice. Whenever he mentioned his husband, it was quick and vague. "He's traveling for work," or "he'll be back next week." But each mention landed like a pebble in water, rippling into silence neither of us filled. The night it all shifted, the storm outside was relentless. I showed up soaked, Henry bouncing with excitement, and Michael greeted me with a softness I hadn't seen before. He wasn't polished that evening. He looked tired, undone. He poured coffee, but his hands shook slightly as he set the mug down. "I should tell you why I really hired you," he said finally. I froze, waiting. "My husband is gone most of the time. When he is here, it's like I don't exist. People whisper about the men he's seen with. I never ask because I already know." He paused, his voice rough. "I didn't put that ad up for Henry. I put it up because I couldn't stand being alone anymore." The weight of his confession settled in the room. I didn't know what to say. He looked at me then, not with pity, not with friendliness, but with raw need. "You're not alone when I'm here," I said quietly, before I could stop myself. For a moment his gaze locked with mine, and the air thickened. I felt the pull, dangerous and undeniable. Henry shifted on the rug, breaking the silence, but the truth was already there, hanging between us. That night, walking back through the rain, my chest was a mess of guilt and longing. I repeated the reminder to myself, "He's married," but the echo that kept clawing at me was louder. "And yet you wanted him anyway." The next few days were quiet, almost too quiet. I still came by, still walked Henry, but Michael pulled back. He was polite, warm even, but careful. Our talks shrank to small exchanges, and for a while I convinced myself that maybe I'd imagined everything. The storm, the confession, the weight in his eyes. But silence doesn't erase truth. It only delays it. 3 nights later, my phone buzzed just as I was about to crash after hours of cramming for exams. His name lit the screen. I stared at it, pulse quickening, half tempted to let it ring out. But when I answered, his voice wasn't the calm one I knew. It was frayed, raw. "Ethan," he said, "can you come?" I sat up, heart pounding. "Is everything okay?" A pause, then, "Please." That single word pulled me out the door. I walked fast through the night, the air sharp with cold. When I reached his porch, he opened before I knocked, as if he'd been waiting there the whole time. His hair was a mess, his eyes shadowed, and Henry barked once before curling back into his corner, like he already knew the mood. We sat side by side on the couch. Minutes ticked by without a word, the silence pressing heavier than the storm that night. Finally, Michael broke it. "I'm tired of being invisible," he whispered. His hands were locked together so tightly his knuckles were white. "To him, to the man I married, to the life I built. I walk into rooms and it's like I don't exist. And just when I started believing it, you showed up. You looked at me. Really looked." I couldn't answer right away. The ache in his voice felt too close, too dangerous. But something in me cracked. I reached out, placing my hand over his. He flinched slightly, then let out a breath, his grip loosening as though he'd been waiting for that touch. Slowly, he turned his hand, threading his fingers with mine. The contact was electric, simple but loaded with everything we hadn't said. "Michael," I began, but the rest tangled in my throat. He met my eyes and I saw it there. Raw longing, vulnerability, desperation. He leaned closer, slow enough that I could have pulled away. I didn't. When his lips touched mine, the kiss was fragile, tentative, trembling, but it shattered weeks of circling what we both already knew. When we pulled back, our foreheads rested together, breaths uneven. His hand brushed my cheek, as if he needed to anchor himself. "I shouldn't," he murmured. "I know," I whispered back, but neither of us moved. After that night, the rhythm changed. We didn't speak about what it meant, didn't define it. The next time I came, nothing dramatic happened. We walked Henry, laughed at his clumsy chase after a squirrel, drank coffee like always. Except now, there were touches that lingered. His hand brushed mine when he poured sugar. My knee pressed against his under the table. A glance that lasted too long, too honest. It was a dangerous comfort. I told myself I should quit, walk away, erase the line we'd already blurred. But every time I rehearsed the words, I saw the way he looked at me, like I was the first real person in his world after years of shadows. And I stayed. One evening, he invited me for dinner. "It's just takeout," he said, though when I arrived, the table was already set, candles flickering. Henry sprawled near the door, tail thumping lazily, as if even he knew something was different. The wine loosened him. He laughed more freely than I'd ever heard, telling me stories about nearly dropping out of college to travel, about the first time he saw the ocean and thought it would swallow him whole. I laughed with him, warmth filling the space where silence usually lived. But when the laughter faded, the air shifted. He leaned back, shirt collar undone, eyes steady on me. "I forgot what this feels like," he said softly. "What does?" "Company. Real company." His gaze lingered, unguarded, vulnerable. The silence stretched, electric. My hand rested on the table. His moved closer, and when our fingers touched, a jolt shot through me. He didn't pull back. His thumb brushed over my skin. Deliberate. "Ethan," he whispered. The way he said my name wasn't casual. It was a confession. My heart hammered. The world narrowed to that moment. The quiet hum of rain outside, the warmth of his hand, the look in his eyes. He leaned forward, lips inches away. For one breath, I wanted nothing more than to close the gap. But panic surged. My chair scraped back hard against the floor. "I can't," I blurted. "You're married." His hand froze, dropping back to the table. His face tightened, pain flickering through his eyes. "I know," he said quietly. Not defensive, not angry, just hollow. The silence that followed felt unbearable. I stood, restless, searching for an exit. "I should go." He didn't stop me. He only walked me to the door, his voice low, fragile. "Good night, Ethan." The rain had slowed to a drizzle as I left. My chest ached, torn between relief and regret. I told myself I'd done the right thing, but every step away felt heavier, because deep down I knew the truth. Doing the right thing had never felt so wrong. The distance lasted only a few days. I still came for Henry, but Michael stayed guarded, careful in a way that felt rehearsed. Our talks slipped back to surface-level things, books, classes, the weather. It was safer, but it felt empty. By the third night, my phone lit up again. His name. My chest tightened. I almost ignored it, but something in me knew better. "Ethan," he said when I answered. His voice cracked on my name. "Please, I need you." I didn't ask questions. I was out the door before my mind caught up. He opened as soon as I reached the porch. No polished mask this time. He looked undone, eyes ringed with exhaustion. Henry greeted me briefly before curling up again, unusually subdued. We sat on the couch, the silence brutal until Michael finally spoke. "I can't live like this anymore." His voice was low, steady but breaking underneath. "He comes home late, leaves earlier. I hear the whispers. I know he's with other men, and I let it happen because it was easier than facing the truth. But you—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "You remind me I still exist." The confession tore at me. I should have walked out. I should have reminded him I wasn't his escape. Instead, I reached for his hand. He gripped mine like it was the only solid thing in the room. This time, when he leaned in, I didn't move away. The kiss wasn't hesitant now. It was desperate, hungry, the dam breaking. Weeks of silence, guilt, and restraint poured out in one reckless surge. We didn't speak after. We just stayed close, Henry resting his head across both our legs, as if sealing something unspoken. From then on, everything blurred. We didn't call it anything, didn't label what was happening, but the lines were gone. I'd stay late, sometimes until dawn crept over the neighborhood. Michael would tell me stories he'd buried for years, how he once dreamed of being an architect, how he thought love was something he'd already lost forever. I told him about the pressure of school, the weight of my parents' sacrifices, the fear of failing before I'd even begun. We laughed too, in ways that made it easy to forget the risk, but guilt stalked me at night when I lay awake in my dorm. I knew what we were doing. I knew what people would say if they found out. And yet, every time I tried to imagine walking away, I saw his eyes the night he called me invisible. And I couldn't. The danger hit sooner than I expected. One evening we were in the kitchen, glasses half full of wine, when the front door clicked open. The sound froze both of us. Michael's face drained of color. "He's not supposed to be back until Thursday," he whispered. My heart slammed against my ribs. Footsteps echoed in the hall. Henry barked once, tail wagging like nothing was wrong. "Go!" Michael hissed. His hand gripped my arm, urgent. "Through the back." I stumbled toward the sliding door, pulse roaring in my ears. As I slipped into the yard, I heard another man's voice inside. Calm, practiced, belonging. My stomach turned. I crouched behind the hedge, rain soaking into my shoes, while their voices carried faintly. I couldn't hear the words, only the cadence. Casual from him, tight from Michael. 10 minutes dragged like an hour before Michael appeared at the door, his face carved with tension. He mouthed one word. "Go." I ran. Back in my dorm, my hand still shook. For hours I replayed it. How close it had been, how easily everything could have exploded. Fear knotted with guilt until I almost convinced myself it had to end. I rehearsed the speech in my head. Thank you for the opportunity. I need to focus on school. Goodbye. But the phone rang again 2 nights later. His voice was low, worn thin. I'm sorry about the other night. I should have been more careful. But don't disappear on me. Please. This is dangerous, Michael, I said, my throat tight. We could have been caught. I know. A pause, then, steady but fragile. I don't love him anymore. I think I've been waiting for you. The words crushed me and lifted me all at once. Part of me wanted to believe him, to throw myself into the hope that it meant something real. Another part whispered that I was fooling myself, that I was just the distraction keeping him from facing what he already knew. Still, I went back. That night when I walked through the door, relief softened every line of him. He reached for my hand like it was instinct, like he couldn't help it. The kiss that followed wasn't fragile anymore. It was certain, desperate, claiming. And for the first time, I didn't fight it. The weight of guilt was still there, gnawing at me. But so was the fire. I told myself it was temporary, that it would burn out. But as he whispered, "You make me feel alive again," I knew I was already too far gone. The days that followed felt stolen. I'd slipped through Michael's door, Henry bounding toward me, and for a few hours it was like the world outside didn't exist. But guilt always waited when I left, whispering reminders. He was married, I was younger, and we were building something fragile on a foundation already broken. I told myself it couldn't last, and then Michael proved me wrong. We sat in the living room one night, Henry stretched across our legs when Michael's voice cut through the silence. I filed the papers. My head snapped up. What papers? Divorce. His gaze was steady, sharper than I'd ever seen. I started the process last week. The word hit hard. Divorce. My breath stalled. Because of me? No, he said quickly. Because of me. Because I can't live like this anymore. Pretending I'm in a marriage that's been dead for years. That would have ended whether you showed up or not. I wanted to believe him, but fear pressed in. Michael, this is going to get ugly. I know. He reached for my hand across Henry's back. But I can't keep hiding. Not from him. Not from myself. The next weeks blurred into battles. Legal calls, late-night arguments I overheard through half-open doors, slammed drawers, footsteps that carried fury. David didn't go quietly. He accused, threatened, demanded. He tried to paint Michael as the villain, the unfaithful one. Word spread quickly. Friends who once filled their home with laughter drifted away. Neighbors whispered. Colleagues at Michael's firm sent cold glances instead of greetings. It was the kind of quiet judgment that cuts deeper than words. I felt it too. Walking across campus, I caught fragments of conversations. My name tangled with his, accusations disguised as curiosity. That's the kid, I heard once, sharp enough to slice. Shame burned hot in my chest, but under it, something steadier grew. Defiance. Michael bore the brunt. He came home drained, carrying the weight of a life unraveling. Some nights he sat on the porch in silence, staring into the dark like it might answer him. Others he paced the living room, voice hoarse from phone calls with lawyers. But through it all, he kept reaching for me. Small touches, whispered thanks, moments where his eyes softened and the fight fell away. You keep me standing, he told me one night, his thumb brushing my knuckles, even when everything else is crumbling. It wasn't easy. Some mornings I wondered if I was ruining my own life before it even started. Professors asked why I looked exhausted. My friends stopped inviting me out, tired of excuses. My parents' calls grew sharper, demanding to know what was distracting me from school. I couldn't tell them the truth. How could I? That I was tangled up with a man twice my age, leaving his husband, facing the collapse of everything he'd built. And yet, every time I thought about walking away, I remembered the sound of his voice that night. I'm tired of being invisible. I couldn't make him invisible again. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon. I'd barely stepped into the yard when David's car screeched into the driveway. He stormed toward the house, shouting Michael's name. My chest locked. For a second, I thought about running, like before, but my legs stayed rooted. Michael appeared at the door, jaw tight, eyes fierce. "Not here," he said, voice clipped. "You think you can just throw away years?" David's words spit like venom. "For him?" His glare landed on me, sharp and furious. My stomach twisted, but Michael didn't flinch. "I'm not throwing anything away. It's already gone." David laughed, bitter. "You'll regret this. Everyone will know what you are." The silence that followed felt heavy, but Michael's next words cut clean. "Good. Let them know. At least it'll be honest." Neighbors peeked through curtains. I felt every eye, every whisper, every judgment. But for the first time, Michael didn't hide. He stood there steady, even as David's face twisted with rage. That night, when the house was finally quiet, Michael sat beside me, shoulders slumped, but eyes alive. "I thought I'd be terrified," he admitted, "but all I feel is free." I believed him. For the first time since the ad on that corkboard, I believed him. Still, I knew it wasn't over. Divorce papers don't end years of silence overnight. Reputations don't rebuild with a single act of defiance. The road ahead would be long, rough, unforgiving. But as Henry rested his head on our knees and Michael's hand found mine in the dark, I thought maybe, just maybe, it would be worth it. The weeks after David's outburst felt like living under a spotlight. His threats turned into accusations, whispered through the firm, slipped into emails, spread across mutual friends. He tried to paint Michael as a liar, a cheater, a man who'd betrayed his vows. But the truth has a way of clawing to the surface. Proof of David's own affairs began to circulate. Photos, receipts, messages, pieces of a life he'd hidden behind his polished image. People who had once echoed his outrage grew quiet. Those who whispered in judgment now looked away, embarrassed they had believed his version of the story. Michael didn't celebrate. He didn't need to. He carried himself the same, steady but tired, as though he'd expected it all along. "I didn't want revenge," he told me one evening. "I just wanted it to stop." Still, the shift was undeniable. The more David's mask slipped, the more space opened for Michael to breathe. Campus wasn't much easier for me. Rumors moved faster than truth. Some people pulled away completely, others stared like I was a scandal walking past. My closest friends asked questions I couldn't answer. But one night, when I admitted the truth to a friend I trusted most, she just sighed and said, "At least you're brave enough to live it. Most people aren't." Her words stuck. Brave. I hadn't thought of myself that way. Mostly I'd felt reckless, guilty, torn between desire and fear. But maybe bravery was just choosing not to disappear, even when the world told you to. Michael and I found new rhythms. We stopped pretending I was just the kid walking his dog. I stayed later, sometimes overnight. We shared meals without rushing, walked Henry without looking over our shoulders. There was no grand announcement, no declaration to the world, but there was honesty. Finally, honesty. The divorce dragged on, messy and bitter, but one morning Michael looked at me with quiet relief. "It's final," he said. His voice didn't rise, didn't crack. It was steady, grounded, done. I thought I'd feel only joy, but there was grief too. Years of his life had ended, and endings always leave scars. Still, when he reached for my hand, I saw something in him I hadn't before. Lightness. Not happiness exactly, but possibility. We faced backlash. Some colleagues never forgave him. Some neighbors never spoke again. My parents struggled when I finally told them the truth. The silence on the line was long, painful, but days later, my mother called back. "We may not understand," she said carefully, "but you're still our son." It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to start. The hardest part wasn't the whispers or the stares. It was learning to believe this wasn't temporary, that I wasn't just a distraction from Michael's broken marriage, but part of the life he was building now. That took time. It took patience. It took late-night arguments, moments of doubt, days where I nearly packed up and left. But each time, he stopped me. Not with promises of forever, but with the same steady truth. "You matter to me. That's enough." One evening, months later, we sat outside with Henry sprawled at our feet. The sun dipped low, shadows stretching across the yard. Michael turned to me, his expression calm but certain. You know, he said, when I first put up that ad, I thought I was just looking for someone to keep my dog company. He paused, his mouth curving faintly. Turns out I was looking for someone to remind me I was still alive. My throat tightened. I wanted to answer, to tell him what he'd given me too. The chance to be seen, to stop hiding, to live a story that felt like mine. But instead, I just squeezed his hand, because sometimes silence says more than words. The world didn't magically accept us. Judgment didn't vanish. There were still nights when fear crept in, when the past clawed at the door. But Michael was no longer invisible, and I was no longer pretending I didn't want him. That was enough to keep moving forward. When I look back to that corkboard in the student union, to the scrap of paper with a phone number and nothing else, I can't help but think about how small choices change everything. I thought I was answering a job ad. What I was really answering was someone's quiet cry not to disappear. And in giving him that, I found something too. The courage to claim a life that was mine, even if the world tried to take it away.